welcome somebody very special today to the Author Spotlight podcast. So we're welcoming Katie Keridan. So welcome.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here today.
So happy to have you. So the Author Spotlight series is a series where we shine a light on some amazing authors and the masterminds behind the stories that they tell. So we're so happy that you're here today, and we're going to kick this off with a bit about your background. Your creative background. I've only got 3 questions.
So I have a rather non-traditional background when it comes to being an author. I have always been fascinated by human behavior and what makes people do the things that they do. I was the first person in my family to go to college. So in my mind, an education was my ticket to a stable job, financial stability, being able to take care of myself, being independent. And being a writer did not seem to match any of those goals. And so I got my bachelor's, I have 2 masters, I have a doctorate. I did my internship at Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine. I did a 2-year research fellowship at Children's National and became a doctor. I was a pediatric neuropsychologist specializing in working with children with brain tumors and leukemia, and absolutely loved my work, loved the patients, loved the families. The losses were absolutely heartbreaking, but the successes were phenomenal. I did not love dealing with hierarchy, bureaucracy, insurance companies, all those fun things that we have here in the United States.
Yeah.
And so eventually I love to write. I had submitted short stories, I'd written poems, I was big into grants and research articles, but there was something in my heart saying, how you're connecting with people is not the way you're supposed to be connecting with people. There's more to it than just being on this tenure track and doing the next thing you think you're supposed to do. And so I eventually moved from working at a hospital to being in private practice so that I would have more control over my schedule, and started taking my writing more seriously and working on my first book. And it's been such a process over the years. I have learned so much. But yeah, following my heart and my dream was not easy by any stretch of the imagination.
Yeah.
I was fortunate to have a lot of privileges that not everyone has to help me along the way. I have a husband. I could not be doing this on my own the way that I'm doing it without his support. But yeah, it's been a fantastic journey.
That's fantastic to hear. So how did you navigate the transition from such a, demanding medical career to focusing exclusively on your creative writing passion?
It was actually a really scary transition. I'm a Capricorn, and so I am type A. I like my schedules. I like rules. I love my routine. And being a creative author, there's kind of none of that. So I really had to learn how to build in schedules and new habits for myself, because I didn't have a supervisor or a boss or a department head saying, this is what you need to do. This is when it needs to happen. You need to write this many chapters by the end of the week. Especially in the beginning, when you're writing your first book and you're hoping that it gets published, it's really just you and the people in your life that are cheering you on. And so it was a process. I made a lot of mistakes. I figured out what didn't work with balancing a medical career and a writing career. And I learned how to reschedule my writing time. When I was working full-time at the hospital and writing, I would probably start writing at 10 or 11 at night, and I'd usually write until midnight or 1 a.m. and then get up, be back at the hospital 6:30 or 7 the next morning. And once I had control over my schedule with private practice, then I was starting to write during the morning or maybe in the afternoon. And I was so worried that my creative muse wouldn't follow me because I was so used to this crazy schedule running on fumes. Thank goodness she did. She has
Oh, that's
showed
great.
up. But there's no, as many craft books as there are out there, there's no formula or prescription for how you become an author and what that journey looks like. And it's going to be different for every single person based on so many factors in their lives. This is also something I was able to do because I have stepchildren and they're older. If I had had younger children during this who needed attention much more frequently than teenagers do, like at least teenagers can make their own lunch, they can,
Yeah.
get themselves around. If I had completely dependent children, this schedule would have looked very different.
And actually, I want to follow on from that. I know you said every author's journey is different. So when you started, this transition, did you, you mentioned a bit about wanting to be published. Did you want to be originally traditionally published or hybrid published or self-published? How did you go about, choosing that journey for yourself, or how did that end up looking for you?
That's a great question. I think one of the things we're so fortunate in the age that we live in is there is more than one path to publishing a book.
Yeah.
And while that definitely brings some challenges, it also brings so many opportunities because now, if you want to write something and put it out there, there is an audience for it. And I
Yeah.
love that we've really been able to tap into some very specific, very niche. I tell people all the time, if you have an interest, write a book and put it out there because there's an audience for it and they will find you. I think for me, the gold standard in my mind growing up had always been traditional publishing. You get an agent, you get a huge book deal, it immediately hits the New York Times bestseller list. You're front page of the Sunday Times, and reality is so very different from
We all start off like that.
from those dreams that we
Yeah.
have. And so I originally, I wrote my first book and started querying agents with it. And I kept getting the same feedback, which was love your work, love your writing, think you'd be great to work with. I'm not taking another young adult author this year. And I had 3 agents in a row respond and say the same thing, which I was appreciative that they responded because a lot
Yeah.
of times you hear about people being completely ghosted by agents. And
Yeah.
so I was fortunate to work with an incredible editor for my series, A.R. Capetta. They are an amazing award-winning author, LGBTQ plus activist, just an all-around phenomenal person. And so I was talking with them and saying, what do I do with this kind of feedback? Because they're not telling me I need to change anything. They're not saying anything is bad or wrong. They're just saying I'm not the right person for them and my story isn't what they're looking for. And so I, after doing a bunch of research, came to the conclusion, as an author, I need to build a platform. The only way I can do that is by getting my books out there.
Yeah.
In the world we live in now, I don't have to wait for an okay from anyone to put this content out there. And
Yeah.
so, do I want to keep querying and talking to people for another 6 months to 2 years? You never know how long it's going to take. And I decided no, that I knew the books were good because I'd worked with extremely experienced professionals in putting them out. And so I decided to go the hybrid route. And what that meant for me was I would foot more of the publishing cost up front, but then I would receive higher royalties at the back end. And I would have a lot more control over my work while also working with a reputable indie hybrid publisher who I knew could help me get into bookstores, that could help me participate in author events. And so I ended up working with Spark Press for the 3 books, and it was a phenomenal experience. I I loved it. I'm still waiting on that New York Times bestseller and, front page on the Sunday Times or the Telegraph, but hopefully that's coming. Hopefully that's next.
Yeah, and actually it's like very profound that you actually said that, because a lot of authors or aspiring authors don't, they like have like rose-colored glasses when they, first decide, I'm gonna put this out there, I've written this, I'm really proud of this, they're like, I'm gonna be published and traditional published and it's gonna be this and it's gonna be great. And it's like sometimes like the reality can be a bit jarring, but as long as you're passionate and you're driven and you believe in what you've written, there's a way forward for you, and there's more than one way forward. And what you mentioned about like agents not hearing back or not like getting any feedback at all is something that a lot of authors experience. And one thing that I've learned from like authors and talking to a lot of people is that sometimes like the agents, it comes down to like what they like, or like, what their preference is in reading or something like that. So it's never really about your book. It's about you finding somebody who actually believes in what you've written and you're putting forward. So there's not more than one way forward, but like, it can be like really debilitating. I've said that right. Debilitating, like that first jarring feeling when you like, step into the publishing industry for the first time and you realize like it's actually really closed off, unfortunately.
Yes, that was so I could not have said that better myself. It's so true. And I think, writing is such a creative, personal process. And then we're tasked with taking this piece of our heart and soul that we have put on paper, packaging it, marketing it, and selling it as a product. And at the end of the day, that's what a book is. It is a product.
Mhm.
But I think what's been really helpful for me is looking at what are my goals as a writer. And that's helped me figure out what opportunities do I say yes to? What kinds of things do I pass on? Where do I spend my time? And, I'm in this for the long run. This is, yes, you hear amazing stories of overnight successes and people who just skyrocketed to the top with a rocket on their back. That is incredibly few and far between. Congratulations to those people.
Yeah.
The best advice, and probably the advice that I have heard the most from people, is be persistent in this industry. Keep showing up, keep putting your work out there. I remember when I started my second book, my PR team said, this is great because do you know what sells your first book? Your second book. And do you know what's going to sell your first two books? Your third book. So no pressure at all. No
Yeah.
pressure. But they're actually right. It takes time to connect with readers, to build an audience, to get your name out there in some way, shape, or form. And it's a process. And I think, we don't always know about, as you said, the behind the scenes and the business aspect of what it's like to be a writer. We do have these rose-colored glasses of how maybe what a Hallmark movie has made us think, or a TV show has portrayed writing as, and it is never, it's never like that.
It's never like that.
Exactly. And that's fine. It's really figuring out what you want from your writing career. I know people who just wanted to put out a memoir because they wanted something to pass on to their children and grandchildren. They don't want a writing career. They're fine to just write one book and that's it. I think really figuring out what you're hoping to get out of it and what are the steps that you can realistically take to get there is a really good place to start in moving forward with this thing we call a writing career.
Yeah, and that's really great advice. So your writing has been featured in a wide array of publications, from poetry to fiction. How has your experience across different genres and formats influenced your approach to storytelling in Rain Returned?
Oh, so I think for me, I love poetry. Poetry moves my spirit in a way that fiction and nonfiction writing just doesn't. Poetry opens my imagination, my creativity. I feel like it elevates the way that I'm able to think about things. And that's the mindset that I really like to go into fantasy world building with. I am a huge world building fan. If it were not for my editor, there would probably just be pages of world building in Rain Returned. And thank goodness for them, because nobody wants pages of what the trees in a forest look like. So I completely get it, as much as I love describing them. I think really pushing myself to learn different types of writing helps me have a better sense of what I enjoy doing, things that I'm good at, things that I need to work on and strengthen. But I always come back to just my appreciation of the written word and its power to transport us places. And some days it's poetry that takes me out of this reality we're in. Other days it's fiction. Other days it's a beautiful nonfiction. And so the more I write, the more I've realized what I enjoy doing and the medium that best conveys whatever ideas I'm trying to get across at that time.
So you've expressed a desire to connect with readers who feel different, misunderstood, or alone. What elements in your stories, such as Rain Returned, are most important to you in fostering the sense of connection and belonging?
These are fabulous questions. I have to say, I do so many interviews and podcasts, and when there's great questions, I am so appreciative. So thank you.
Oh, thank you.
I always like to say, so I have two main characters in my series. Kyra is my female main character, and Sebastian is my male main character. And I always like to say that Sebastian is who I am, and Kyra is who I aspire to be. Sebastian has a very difficult background. He experienced a lot of childhood abuse. He went through a lot of trauma. We have those things in common. That's why I wrote them into the book. I wanted people who had experienced non-idealistic childhoods to be able to see themselves as a character on a book, on the pages of a book. And I wanted to show what the process of recovering from trauma is like, because it's not easy. And I know this is where my neuropsychology background and my, understanding of brain behavior relationships came into play, because so many times, especially in young adult books, trauma is healed overnight. As soon as you find your soulmate, everything is fixed. Everything is good. You don't have any issues anymore. You don't have any psychological challenges. Everything is good because you found your soulmate. And while that is a lovely sentiment, and I absolutely love to read books like that, that's not what I wanted to write and put out there. I wanted to put out something that if I had come across it as my 16-year-old self, I could have seen myself on these pages and had some kind of a blueprint for how do I move forward. Yes, I found this person that I'm in love with, but I still have all this trauma inside me. How do I heal while I'm working on starting a relationship? It's not easy. There's a lot of challenges, and that's really what I wanted to portray. It's a healing journey. We get better by having people in our lives who love us and support us and provide safe spaces for us. But that doesn't just happen overnight in the blink of an eye. And I really wanted people to know it's okay if your healing takes time. It's not linear. It can look like whatever it's going to look like. There will be setbacks. That's fine. The people who love you will support you through it. And so I really wanted characters to have realistic flaws so that readers could see themselves and have a sense of hope that even though things may be terrible, even though they may have suffered unjustly, there's always hope, and they can make choices that allow them to become the person that they want to be without ever sugarcoating it and saying that this will just be a fun, easy process.
So, writing journey and inspiration. So, what inspired you to begin, writing fanfically? What inspired the story of Rain returned?
So I grew up pretty much in the middle of nowhere in Texas on a ranch. My best friend was my horse. I saw other kids at school, but no one lived around us. So I wasn't riding the bus home with anyone. I didn't have a neighbor that I could walk to. If I walked somewhere, it was to the barn. And books were my salvation and my escape. I loved the library and thought that was the most magical place in the entire world. And since I couldn't take myself anywhere as a kid, books gave me the opportunity to, go somewhere else, at least mentally, when I was stuck in a not very nice reality. And so I read prolifically as a child, and I have no doubt that everything I consumed as a kid somewhere stuck up here and started forming the basis for the story that I would eventually write. I knew that I loved the enemies to lovers trope because it just speaks to me. I love when people hate each other and then they
Me
figure out,
too.
oh, maybe they're not so bad. And then they're like, I can never live without this person. It's such a great arc. I also love the found family or the chosen family trope because that's been really huge in my life. Is just because you're related by blood doesn't mean anything. In order to be in my life, you need to not be making me feel worse. And you need to be, there are boundaries for being in my life. And so I wanted to include that there. I knew that I wanted a soulmate story because I love the idea of a soulmate story. And so when I started the book, I knew how I wanted the series to end. I knew I wanted it to be a trilogy, and I knew what I wanted the very end to be. So then I mentally worked backwards and said, okay, if I'm chopping this up over 3 books, what does that first book need to look like? What do I need to convey? And I really just started by getting to know my characters, by writing snippets and short stories about Sebastian doing something or Kyra doing something, writing paragraphs about how I envisioned their world. And slowly things started to come together where I could see, oh, I could actually take this from just describing things that are interesting to me into a story. And that's, of course, when I found an editor. I wanted to make sure that I didn't have any plot holes, that I was actually thinking this out, because there's nothing worse than a reader emailing you about a plot hole. It's my fear. It has not happened, thank goodness, but it's such a fear. And so it really was just me getting to know the characters and seeing where the story wanted to go. I'm sure you hear this from authors all the time. Our characters do things that surprise us.
Yeah.
Even if we know how we want our story to end or what's going to happen, the characters don't always play along. Half the time they want something different. They are determined to go in a different way. And to me, that's the creative, fun process where even I'm surprised by some of the things that come out when I'm writing.
That's fantastic to hear. Yeah, a lot of people do say that.
I bet we all have that in common.
Yeah, you're the first person that I've actually talked to that said that they work backwards from their story, because like that's me as well. Like I know how like everything ends, and then I'm like, okay, how does it get to this point?
Exactly. Oh, I love that. Yes, it's like I know where I want it to be, but then I have to take 300 pages to figure out how we're going to get there, because otherwise the end scene, if you don't have a good journey getting to the end, then it's just not as impactful as you want it to be. So it's all about how can I build up to this satisfying conclusion or this cliffhanger conclusion, depending on which book in the series you're working on.
Also, like, what tools have you found like useful? Like, do you like plot out everything, or do you kind of just like write by the seat of your pants, as a lot of authors?
I know, the plotters versus pantsters.
Yeah.
I will say I tend more towards the plotter side, but I always leave room for pantser inspiration. So once I kind of have an idea for a story, like I said, I will always know what the end is going to be. It usually takes me a couple of drafts to figure out the right opening for the story. And as I've written, I've gotten a lot more comfortable with less lead in to the story because readers don't care. We want to start in the action. We want to start where something is happening, and then we want to see where it goes and what happens from
Mm.
there. I have such a tendency to want to preface everything with a lot of exposition and background information, and it's it's helpful information to have, but the reader doesn't need it dumped on them in the very beginning of the book.
Yeah.
And so it's really, once I have a story idea and I've played around with figuring out, where it's going to start and where it's going to end, I do try to go through and come up with a very general outline. It might just be a sentence thinking that's what this chapter needs to be about. Something needs to happen here where there's a fight. In this chapter, there needs to be a reconciliation. So I never go crazy in depth with my outline because it's always subject to change. And I don't think I have ever followed an outline perfectly. And that's okay because it's a starting place. That's the way I look at anything in the early stages of writing. It's a starting place.
Yeah.
And Jodi Picoult is famous for her quote of, you can always edit bad writing. You can't edit a blank page. And so for me, it's just about how do I start putting stuff on the page so I'm not overwhelmed by all of this white space on here that I need to fill up with brilliant, breathtaking words. I just get stuff on there, and then you can edit, then you can rearrange, then you can go back and figure out what's actually the best order for things, because it's probably not going to be what I originally thought it was, and that's okay.
No, that's okay. Have you found that it's like a bit, do you put like a word limit on yourself? Because sometimes I find like if I just put stuff on the page, sometimes I go over, and then when it comes time to editing and cutting, I'm like, I don't want to cut that. No, I want to keep that. I
Oh,
really don't want to cut that.
editing. Editing is so hard. It's so sad. I will tell you, I actually, for every book that I've written, I do keep a document where any quote that I have cut and edited away that I really love, it's not gone for good. I put it in this other document and save it.
Yeah.
Even now that the books are published, and
Yeah.
obviously they're not changing, I still like having those documents because there's just no way to fit everything that an author wants in a
Yeah.
book. These books would be 1,000 pages long, and it's really, really challenging. Over the course of 3 books, I have gotten more comfortable with it, probably because my editor has forced me to. But I've become more focused on, rather than how beautiful this particular sentence is or how desperately I want to keep this paragraph because I'm so proud that I wrote it, I'm switching my mindset to be what is in service of the story, what works best for the story. And when I look at it through the mindset of, I want this to be the best story possible, I want this to touch the readers that it is meant to touch and connect with. So, what can I do to put it in that position? It makes me feel a little less bad about having to get rid of some of the parts, because then I can tell myself it's not because they're bad. It's not because there was something wrong with them. They just weren't pushing the story forward. And to me, at this point, it's all about the story and getting that out there and what will connect with readers. So I don't know that I'll ever not feel a pang in my heart when I have to edit something, but I'm able to do it with less tears now, 3 books later, than I was in the beginning.
Oh, that's great to hear because, yeah, like when I get notes back from the editor, sometimes I'm like, oh, they really liked it. I remember one time, my editor was like, wow, why didn't she like, there was like a huge action scene, and the editor was like, in the notes section, like, why didn't she shoot her in the knees instead of like like, just like on the side, like I was like, oh, so she really liked it. But like I had to rewrite the whole thing because it just made me laugh because it's really an enjoyment when like the editor gets into it as well. And then like when they do say you need to cut this, it's like, okay, it's not so bad, you know?
Yes. Yes. Oh my gosh, you're so right. When you feel like your editor is invested in your characters and in your world, and that they also really want the best for this story, it 1000% makes it so much easier because they're not just doing this to mess with you. They're not trying to make you cry more tears over your writing than you already do.
Yeah.
They really want this to be in the best position possible. And so much of writing is so solitary. Most days it's just me here at the house with the cats hunched over my laptop like a little gremlin, just typing away. And so those connections with editors, with critique partners, with beta readers, if you're in a writing group, they're priceless when you know that the people around you support you and have you and your book's best interest at heart. It's huge.
Mhm. And you're right, like writing is a very like solitary endeavor. So like when you share that part of, what you've been like, I like to say like hoveled away for like the past year writing, and then you finally like present it to someone, you're kind of like self-conscious about it. And it never really goes away because you're always like worried about like what the readers are gonna say or what people are gonna like it, they're gonna hate it, or but like it's part of the job.
Yes. Yes, you just described my emotional journey of writing a trilogy
Yeah.
perfectly because the first book sets up the series and you hope it grabs people and interests them enough that they want to buy the second book when it comes out to see what happens. The second book has to be a bridge between books 1 and 2, but it also needs to be able to stand alone as just a well-written book by itself. And then by the time you get to the third book, you're trying to wrap up everything and all the seeds that you've planted from the first 2 books while making sure that there's a satisfying ending. It's a lot to keep track of.
It is. So I've noticed, and obviously we talked a little bit about your career and background. So also the listeners have noticed that, you've been passionate about, combining creativity with science and the arts. So how does this background influence your storytelling?
So one of the things that I love doing, especially in fantasy worlds, is coming up with magic systems, but magic systems that could be plausible, that
Yeah.
could have an underlying scientific basis to them. It's really interesting because I'm currently working on a middle grade book right now. The character is an 11-year-old girl who is autistic. And she is very science focused. Science can explain everything. And she's forced to challenge some of these beliefs when something magical happens in her life. And so it probably even more than my young adult series, this middle grade book has been so fun to dive into the intersection of science and magic, which could just be another name for creativity, and really getting to play with ideas of just because we can explain something, does that make it more or less magic? Is magic just something that science doesn't explain yet? All those fun kind of questions that I like to examine myself. I've really been able to build off of the 3 books that I've written and delve even more in depth into that in the book that I'm working on now.
So how did you go about, choosing the names of, your books? Was it like a process? How did you go about that?
So Rain Returned, I knew the title to that before I had even written the book. Once I knew what the end of the series was going to be, the title just popped into my mind and would not go away. I
Mhm.
was very fortunate that my editor and my publishing team liked it, because that probably would have been a battle. Note to authors: pick your battles with the people in your corner as you're putting a book out. You're not going to want to fight or push back about everything, but you do need to decide what are your kind of, we do not pass this point because this is super important to me and needs to be a conversation. So for the first book, I had that one coming in. That title was good to go. The second book, the title really came out of the content. You know, the title is Blood Divided. And when we find our two realms in this book, the realms are divided by gold and silver blood. And they have never been more divided than they are in this book, and just at each other's throats and ready to destroy each other. So that kind of came out of the content as I was writing it. The third book, Realm United, I was completely stumped on that one. That title, I was well into multiple drafts, preparing to go to first pass pages. We were already looking at cover art. And I was like, I don't know. I guess this book just won't have a name. I don't know. And then one day, while I was kind of thinking through things, it came to me, and it seemed so simple in retrospect. Like, well, of course, we know our heroes want to reunite the realm, so that we're back to one united realm. Like, of course, this makes sense for it. But for some reason, it took a really long time to kind of get to that point. And, you know, I was fortunate that everyone liked the titles. I knew I wanted them to be short, kind of catchy, a couple of words, and to feature prominently on the cover so that they would kind of be right there where you could see them. So it was a crazy title journey.
It is, and actually that's what people don't understand is like sometimes, like, when it might look like when your readers have the book, like, oh, like they just had it all planned out. Like, no, they probably thought about that name for like 2 years. It was probably saved, you know, in the files as something else, and then like last minute it changed. But like, it's a process.
Yes, it completely is. And you never know which direction it's going to go, or what's going to jump out at you, or what will spark something that will be an idea that's like, oh, that's the perfect title I was looking for. So do not stress if you don't immediately go into a book knowing what the title will be. Every book will reveal its title to you in its time.
Yeah. So we're going to do book deep dive in this section. So Rain Returned introduces a world where magical beings and humans interact. Can you tell us about your approach to world building and creating these realms?
Absolutely. So I knew that I wanted to start with the realms in chaos and in a terrible position, and with people not trusting one another, not wanting anything to do with each other, and being really biased and prejudiced against each other. Because I wanted to show a way forward that life did not have to be like this. Unfortunately, in order to move forward, you know, you kind of have to start where it is the worst, because there's no place to go except up. At least that's the way I saw it as an author. I knew that there was going to be positive change in the right direction, but it was going to be challenging and take time. I am a huge animal lover. And so I love, you know, in books like with The Golden Compass, where we have characters who have their souls in animal form, like walking around next to them. I knew I wanted something with animals in my book, which is why I came up with the concept of ciphers. And so every person is paired with an animal that's kind of like their spirit guide / conscience, that provides advice, you know, as they go about their lives. And it was so much fun to me to bring in a different aspect where I could include animals, but in a young adult appropriate way. You know, it's not like they're just carrying around a little pet in their purse that they're talking to occasionally. It's like, no, this is someone that they have a relationship with and that they learn from, that they grow with. And it was really fun because the ciphers provide a lot of humor in the stories. You know, there's a lot of times where things get very dark, and they should be, because it's a reflection of what life can be like when we're not making the best choices for ourselves as people and as a society. And so I needed moments of levity to kind of give the reader a chance to pause and to
Yeah.
go, okay, all is not lost. Everything is not terrible. Like, it's bad, but we see a way forward and we're going to do what we can to try to bring about the change that we want to see. And
Mm.
so I combined elements from fantasy novels that I have loved over the years, where we have realms, we have portals, we have, gold and silver blood, we have
Yeah.
animals bonded to you that are able to give you the advice that you wish someone was whispering over your shoulder to you in your darkest moments. And I combined them all to create to create the book that I would love to read, basically.
Yeah. And it's so like amazing that you talked about that. Oh, sorry. I don't know what. If we disconnect, just click the same link again. Sorry, I just got a thing, so don't worry about it. So it's so crazy that you said that, because it reminds me of when we started the conversation where you talked about how your horse was, one of your best friend, and it just goes to show, like, as authors, you leave pieces of yourself behind in the books that you write and the stories you tell.
Always. I love that you picked up on that. Yes, absolutely. There are so many little pieces of me scattered across these 3 books. Probably my husband has read the books, and it's so fun when he can point out things and say, "Oh, that is so you," or, "I think I've heard you say something just like this." But it's also fun because there's probably some pieces that no one but me even knows. And I would venture, unconsciously, I've left little Easter eggs or breadcrumbs in there that I might not even be aware of, that are just a way of expressing myself in word to other people.
So, in your novels, you delve into themes of destiny, love, and identity. Why did you choose to explore these themes, and what do you mean? What do they mean to you?
I think for me, they're huge existential questions that I don't necessarily have an answer to, but that I love trying to answer. And where I hope that the richness and the value is in the journey more than the destination. So in thinking about destiny, one of my questions, even for myself, is destiny a matter of chance, or is it a matter of choice? I prefer thinking it's a matter of choice, because I like thinking that if I work hard, if I persist, good things will happen and things will move forward. Now, we also live in a world that is not a meritocracy, and we are not all starting at the same point. And there are so many societal and structural challenges that just are almost impossible to overcome, in a sense. And I feel like in order to move forward and to figure out what your destiny is, it's really a struggle. And I'm okay with that, because, like I said, I think sometimes that's where we learn and grow, but I also know that that's different for every person. So I never want to say that just because this is what I think about, that absolutely goes for, some other person too. But I love wrestling with the big questions, and, in looking at identity and who I am. I have changed so much over the course of my life, from things that have happened unexpectedly, from choices that I've made, from situations where I didn't have any control. And there have been so many times where I've kind of had a sliding doors moment of wondering, well, what if I had done something different here? Would I still be the same person that I am? One of the things my characters struggle with, Sebastian, with his past trauma, Kyra is a healer, and she's working on mastering the ability to be able to remove traumatic memories. And Sebastian isn't really sure how he feels about this, because on the one hand, he would love to have his worst memories erased. On the other hand, if that happens to him, Does that change who he is as a person? Does that change
Mhm.
whatever destiny he's fighting for? Does that change his identity? And I don't know that there's right or wrong answers to these questions, but it's
Mhm.
really fun to explore them. And so that's why there's such prominent themes in my books.
Mhm. So each of your characters faces inner and outer challenges. How do you balance their personal growth with the wider conflict in the story?
Oh, that is one of the many threads that you have to hold as an author because there's always more than one plot line running through every chapter and running through every book. And
Yeah.
so it absolutely is looking at every chapter and saying, am I moving the overall plot forward? And or am I advancing my character's growth in some way, shape, or form? And some chapters are much more focused on the overall big plot. Other chapters are more specific and central to what's happening to a particular character. But one of those two things is always happening in every chapter. At least that's the goal.
Mhm. So we're going to move on to process and character development within, the book. So you've spoken about your fascination with fantasy since you were young. Do any of your characters or setting reflect aspects of yourself or your experience? Well, we've touched upon that already.
So definitely Sebastian, for sure, with his background and his growth and healing and overcoming the personal trauma that he's been through. Um, I would also say Kyra is very stubborn when it comes to fighting for what she believes in. And when she is passionate about something, it's going to be really difficult to change her mind. And I didn't even realize that I had kind of pulled that from myself until my editor reflected back on it and was saying, I wonder where this is coming from. And I was kind of like, oh, wow, I definitely know where this is coming from. And I think, over the years, I've learned to channel that stubbornness for good causes and for moving forward in positive ways or for championing, things that I'm passionate about. And it was really kind of funny to see that show up in her and be like, "Oh, wow, I like that trait in her." And then go, "Oh, haha, maybe that's something positive I pulled from myself
Yeah.
without even realizing it."
Yeah. So, with the complex worlds and themes in your books, how do you approach your writing process? Do you obviously you love to plot everything, and we've spoken a bit about that. So, or how do you like allow the story to evolve, and like what other tools do you use?
I think for me, I have to remember to get away from my manuscript that I'm working on because left to my own devices, I would probably sit in a chair for 8 hours straight and just wrangle these words around on the page. That is not always the most productive use of my time or the way to actually get what I want out of my head and onto paper. So going out into nature for me is a huge tool that is so effective. My husband and I are fortunate to live next to a really nice paved trail that goes through a county park and there's a creek and lots of birds and animals. And so sometimes it's just nice to go get outside, to not be so just staring at my computer screen. And it's always amazing to me when I do something that's not necessarily writing related, then I'll have some great spark of inspiration or something will
Yeah.
happen that I didn't expect because I gave myself the chance to just stop focusing so intently on it. I'm also a big yoga practitioner.
Yeah.
That has been huge for me mentally, learning to control my breathing, working through things in my body as well as in my mind. And so it's funny because some of my most effective writing tools actually have nothing to do with writing, but they always kind of circle back around to I'll be inspired over something and kind of not even realize that I needed this break in order for this breakthrough to happen.
It's great to hear that. So we're going to move on to Blood Divided. So Kyra and Sebastian are grappling with the weight of their past lives. How did you explore their transition from memory recovery to, taking action towards returning, reunifying the realms? I know, like you mentioned a little bit about how, he was grappling with the idea of, if she takes away my, memories, or like my traumas, would that change who I am? Because I do feel that, our everything, the good, the bad, the ugly, does kind of shape of who we are at a certain point in time. So, like, if you do remove that, I mean, are you the same person?
Right? It's a question worth asking, because it really, I don't know. I loved the idea of having two soulmates who had been happily married in a past life reincarnate and come back and not know who they used to be and who each other was. Because I feel like soulmate relationships are so wonderful. We love the idea of finding this one person who is meant for us, but sometimes that's kind of where it ends. In a YA book, at least, you find that person and then that is it. And that has never been my experience in real life. No matter how happy you are with your partner and how perfect you are together, life is still life, and there's going to be hardships. There's going to be things that you have to figure out how to talk about. There's going to be things that you have to overcome. And so I loved the idea of these people having past memories of themselves being happily married and knowing who each other was, and then coming back and going, well, I have these memories and I know you're the same person, kind of, but you've also had different life experiences this time around. So you're a different person. And I'm going to kind of have to get to know you all over again, was just a really fun juxtaposition to play with, of how well you know someone mixed with that process of you're kind of having to get to know them all over again.
Mhm. So Kyra and Sebastian's mission to bring peace between astrals and devils. I hope I've said that.
Yeah,
Have I said
that
that
was
right?
perfect pronunciation.
I hope you're not just saying that because I have an issue with
No.
pronunciation. um, you should see me trying to pronounce things. So reflects real world themes of, reconciliation and unity. What inspired you to weave these, you know, stories between silver and gold bloodlines into your story?
Probably because at the end of the day, I am an eternal optimist. And hope, I always hold on to the hope that humans can choose to be the best versions of themselves, that we can choose to protect the world that we live in, that we can choose to love and support and learn about and understand one another. And so I really wanted to take a lot of the issues that we're seeing in society today, but put them in a fantasy world where you're a little bit removed from them. And by commenting on them and talking about them and working through them in this made up fantasy world, I hoped that people could say, well, what if we could do that in this world? What if we could be kinder? What if instead of there's this person I don't understand, instead of, you know, not wanting anything to do with them, maybe I actually try to get to know them and understand them better. And so I hoped at the end of the day that readers could see, here are things you can do to create the kind of world that you want to live in if you're not already in some wonderful utopia. And so it was really looking at our society, but removed by placing it in a fantasy world.
Yeah. So we're going to move on to building complex relationships and alliances within Blood Divided. So with Kyra improving her recoverance abilities and working through, her internal struggles, she's juggling many responsibilities. including her internships. How did you approach building her character arc to balance these personal and magical challenges?
That's an excellent question. I will say Kyra was the hardest character that I wrote in the entire series. Sebastian, I knew from the get-go. And it was interesting because Sebastian kind of starts, I mean, he starts as an assassin for hire. He starts in a really bad, dark place. So
Yeah.
his character arc is kind of going from bad to good. Kyra starts out kind of great and is this awesome, successful person who's kind of getting everything she wants. And then her life comes crumbling down. She experiences, a terrible family tragedy. She discovers that she possesses a magic that hasn't been seen for thousands of years and is outlawed in her realm. Suddenly, her perfect life is not so perfect. And so she almost goes from kind of everything is great to, oh, wow, everything is terrible and I don't know how to navigate this. And I really liked the juxtaposition of the two characters. Sebastian is very pragmatic. He's worldly. He's all about whatever it takes to get something done. Kyra starts out much more naive with rose-colored glasses. There is good and there is bad, and that's it. And over the course of the book, she grows and learns things are not always what they seem, for better or for worse. And she realizes that she might not always have the answer, and that's okay because she can find it from the people around her. She doesn't have to do everything on her own. And so it was really figuring out where these characters start and what arc they needed to get to the point where I wanted them to be by the end of the third book.
So Talus's reappearance raises the stakes significantly. How did you develop the dynamics between Kyra, Sebastian, and Talus as they, struggle to stop his plan?
Oh, I love writing villains. I think that in order to have a really strong hero, you need a strong villain. And it is so frustrating to me when I read a book and I'm going, oh, I hope the villain does this, or this. And then they kind of don't ever do anything. They're supposed to be scary because the author is telling you they're scary and terrible. And so I really pulled a lot of Talus from Neil Shusterman's Arc of a Scythe series. I think his Robert Goddard is one of the best villains I've ever read because he is so passionate and so sure that he's right and so sure that these terrible things he wants to do aren't bad because they're coming from a good place inside him. And that's a dangerous villain. When someone thinks that they know best for everyone and that they will do whatever it takes to bring about the world they envision, that's terrifying. And so I wanted Talus to come across as someone who you wouldn't immediately be terrified of. If you met this person, he's charming. He starts out charming, kind, very concerned about other people, I just want the best for this realm. And then as the series goes on, we see his darker intent and what he is willing to do to bring about the world that he envisions. And to me, balancing that with the other two characters was a lot of fun because Kyra's naive and completely has no idea who he really is in the beginning. I feel like Sebastian would have seen through him a lot sooner, but Sebastian doesn't interact with him until a little bit later. And so really playing on the strengths and weaknesses of the characters and how they would relate to the villain was how I handled the interactions for those three.
Yeah. So the role of friendship and new alliances. So Cypherus and other allies play an important role in Blood Divided. What was it like to create these supporting characters, and how do they influence Kyra and Sebastian's journey?
I think we are so made up of the people in our lives. They influence us in ways great and small. And I wanted Kyra and Sebastian to have people in their lives who were rooting for them, who were cheering them on, who loved them for who they were, and who supported them in ways that they needed support. And what's interesting is Kyra starts out with very strong friendships. Dimitri's her best friend. She has an active social life. Sebastian is the complete opposite. He is happy being isolated and alone in his cave. He doesn't think he needs anyone in his life. He can do everything himself. And he learns over his arc that's not true. He does have people in his life who care about him, whether he initially sees that or not. And for Kyra, her friends are such a source of strength. You know, when her world's falling apart and she's having to figure out, okay, how do I regroup and go forward from here? Her friends provide such support and strength that she truly could not do it without them. And I've been both. I have thought that I needed to do everything completely on my own, didn't need anyone around me to help me.
Mhm.
And I've learned over the years that is absolutely not true. We're so much stronger together. And, you know, while I'm definitely picky about who I let into my innermost circle in order to keep myself protected, it's been so rewarding learning to be vulnerable and open up and establishing friendships and deep connections. And they're priceless. And that's something that the characters are fighting to protect in these realms. And I think that's huge.
Actually, you touched on to like my next question because the book explores not just romantic connections but also friendships. So how did you decide which friendships would grow or change as the characters face their new trials?
It's interesting because I always knew Dimitri would be Kyra's best friend. Dimitri was there from the very, very beginning. What I did not expect was that Adonis, excuse me, was going to have such a big role. He kind of came on to the page and just took over. And I was fine with that because he's such a fun character for Sebastian to interact with. You know,
Mhm.
you have this military soldier who is strong and confident and good looking and just a really nice guy who wants to be friends with Sebastian. And Sebastian does not know how to handle this and is kind of like, what do you want? And like, what are you trying to get from me? And his friendship arc with Adonis was so much fun to write because he realizes he doesn't want anything from me. He likes me. He sees the good in me that I try to bury down deep or that I do have. And so it was so much fun having the two of them play off each other and kind of develop this really sweet bromance for lack of a better word, that was so fun and so needed for Sebastian, that he could see he could be loved and liked exactly as he is. And that was huge for him because that has not been his experience.
I love a good romance.
I do too. It's so fun to write. I love the back and forth banter. And
Yeah.
you know, they have a great scene where they're like fighting slash play fighting and kind of seeing who's the better swordsman. And it's really fun because they're both not really taking it seriously, but they kind of are taking it
Yeah.
seriously. And it was really fun to write.
Yeah. So, themes of past, present, and choices. So, the line, changing the future means surviving the past, I love it,
Thank
captures the
you.
struggles Kyra and Sebastian face. So, how does this theme guide their decisions, and what does it reveal about, your larger vision for the story?
I think sometimes, especially when we've gone through challenging or really horrible things, um, we look at ourselves, at least for me, and think, well, I'm just a survivor. Like I just got through that. All I did was survive it. I didn't do anything great. That doesn't make me special. And that's not true. Surviving something is huge and incredible. And whether, whether it's the way I would have preferred to become resilient and strong and develop perseverance, probably not. But as you said, we take the experiences that we've been through and we decide what we want to do with those. Do we want those to weigh us down for the rest of our lives? Or is there a way that we can work through them and somehow transmute them to experiences that can touch and help other people? And so really, what I think for these characters is they've survived so much, and that's huge. It's also the first step in order to bring about change. You have to be present to make the change happen. And so
So how did you find like your writing style has evolved since you started? Have you noticed the change yourself, or has it just stayed the same?
I have definitely grown in my confidence in putting my characters in peril in terrible situations. I am much more comfortable making them go through terrible things, even though I hate it.
Yeah.
But that's how they learn and grow. And if they don't have these experiences, they're never going to change. They need these experiences to push them to become the people that they're meant to be. And in the beginning, I wanted to protect my characters far more than I do now. Now I know, I'm sorry, I have to shove you out of the nest so that you learn how to fly.
And that's what we call character growth, guys.
Exactly. And so I'm much more comfortable, and it's been really fun to see my writing progress across the 3 books because it's obvious to me. And I think that's a good thing. I know a lot of people who are really scared to publish their first book because they're terrified it won't be perfect. And perfect is the enemy of ever publishing a book. I don't think anyone's first book is probably ever the best thing that they're going to write. I hope my first book is not the best thing that I ever write. I want to learn and grow and get better. And that to me is part of being in this career, is how do I improve with each book that I write? And that doesn't take away anything from the earlier books that we write. We can just look back and say, oh, I would have done something different there, or interesting choice. And so it's fun to look back on our writing.
It is. And like to just add on a bit more on that is that like I've got books that have been published, and if I could go back and rewrite them, I would. I think perfection is overrated and doesn't really exist. I think it's like something that's just there to label, and just it can hinder you if you let it.
Absolutely. I mean, when I was in my doctorate program, I remember my dissertation chair said, listen, there's a perfect dissertation and there's a done dissertation. You want to get it done. Like this will not be the most profound thing you ever write. And I think it's the same way with books. In order to get a catalog out there, to have titles behind your name, you have to start somewhere. And it's terrifying and it's really scary. But once you put that out there, it also offers the opportunity for connection that is priceless. When someone says that they related to something that you wrote and it spoke to them, I don't know that there's kind of any higher praise I could get as an author than that.
Yeah. Speaking of like reviews, how would you advise, authors or aspiring writers out there to handle either, the positives and the negatives that come with criticism over their writing? Because we can be very protective as writers, and sometimes you might read something, you're like, I want to like reply, but like, oh, don't do that. You just got to act like you've not seen it, and just I don't know. Is there like, what do you think?
I think one thing that helped me going into writing is because of my scientific background, I was very familiar with writing academic research papers, with
Mhm.
applying for grants. And I was so familiar with rejection because trying to get a scholarly paper in a peer-reviewed academic journal that has a 5% acceptance rate, all you get back is just no, 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 red
Mhm.
pen over everything. So
Yeah.
I was fortunate that I was very desensitized to rejection coming into writing. And I had the mindset of when something is good, it's not about should it be published or not, it's finding the right publishing home for it. And so for me, I had a different perspective on rejection and was kind of able to say, it's not me, it's not the writing, it's not this piece of my soul that they hate. This is just not the right outlet for it. That being said, rejection never feels good. We never like being told that something we did could have been done differently or hearing it criticized. But I think knowing that that's a part of it going into it
Mhm.
is helpful because then you're not surprised. I always say enjoy the positives because they won't last forever, but neither will the negatives. It's a blip on the radar, and then the publishing cycle moves on and we're on to something else. And so I feel like celebrate the small wins. Don't wait until you're a New York Times bestseller to celebrate something that you've done. You had a book come out, it's time to celebrate. You self-publish something, do something good for yourself. You signed with an indie, a hybrid, whatever kind of publisher, pop open the champagne. Don't wait for what you think is going to be this big, huge moment that's worthy of celebration. Celebrate the small steps along the way.
Speaking of celebrating the small stuff, we've already touched upon, how you went into hybrid publishing, but for those who don't know, what the process is like in hybrid publishing, could you enlighten us a bit?
Absolutely. So with traditional publishing, usually when your book is sold, you receive some kind of money up front for your book. Let's say that a publisher agrees to pay you $3,000 for this book. You get $3,000. Yay, good for you. Once your book has sold $3,000 worth of money and has made that back for your publisher, then you start to get royalties. And that is dependent upon every publisher does royalties different. There's, different schedules for it, different amounts. Your agent gets a cut of this. So it can be a while before you start to see any kind of a financial return, even though you might have gotten a chunk of money up front. With hybrid publishing, you pay for some or all of the publishing costs of the book. So rather than a publishing company giving you money, you give a publishing company money. The difference is you get higher royalties with that book. And so you don't have to wait until your book sells a certain amount or makes that, first payment back. You start making royalties as soon as the book is sold. And
Yeah.
rather than lower royalties, lots of hybrid publishers have royalties anywhere between 60 to 80% that the author gets, which is much nicer than 10 to 20%. Now, the challenge with hybrid publishing is it does require you to be able to have some amount of money, whatever this publishing company is charging, it does require you to have that up front. And that can be really challenging to come up with, a few thousands of dollars all the way to tens of thousands of dollars, depending on who you work with. And so I think a lot of it is figuring out what is the right strategy for you and what can you make work with the life that you have right now. There's no bad or morally right or wrong strategy. It's just what can you do with where you are right now.
Did you need an agent when you figured out what publisher you were going with or not?
I did not. No, I did not. And, I still think in the back of my mind, it's something I would like to have. I've loved hybrid publishing. It's been a great experience. I definitely have not closed the door on traditional publishing, but I feel like now I'm able to look at it with eyes wide open. I know the publishing industry more. I know the difference between different types of publishing. And I feel like I can make the decisions that are best for me rather than making decisions that are just desperate to get a book out or made out of fear that I may never get this book out if I don't work with this one person. And it's a lot more freeing to feel like I'm in control of my professional journey at this point.
So how important is having a strong author platform?
I would say it again depends on your goals and what you want. For me, I want a place where people can connect with me and talk about books. And so I have a very safe space and I'm very intentional in who I follow. I'm very intentional in what I post. And I want people who are there because they're also being their authentic selves. And so for me, it's much more about connection and kind of could I be friends with this person in real life?
Yeah.
And I take it very seriously. I don't just follow anyone to follow people. And I'm really glad when people don't do that with me as well. You'll kind of see people lurking around for a while and maybe they'll like a couple of posts and then eventually they'll follow you. And I feel like that's good. They made an informed decision about my content and what I'm creating and they want to be here. So I feel like, again, if your goal is to blow up on TikTok, there's nothing wrong with that. You're just going to need to do certain things to get yourself there. And I'm not interested in those things. I would much rather foster authentic interactions and connection. And if that means fewer followers, that's fine because we're all having a good time together.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard, like impressions and all of that. And at the same time, sometimes you might find yourself not being authentically you. And when people find you on your platform, you want to be authentically you because at the end of the day, like no matter if you're like self-publishing or hybrid publishing, if your goal eventually is to maybe do get that traditional publishing contract, it's good to have a good portfolio behind you, a good brand behind you, because it all adds to not the clout, no, but like it all adds to the benefits that you have and puts you in a good position when hopefully if that door does open, you have a strong place to negotiate from, which others don't.
Exactly, because you've shown you can do this. You've shown you can start a book, you can finish a book, you can get it out, you can promote it. And those are things that people look at in making book deals.
Yeah.
It's not just this is such a great book, that's why it got a deal. There's a lot of other factors that go into it. Like, is this author a nice person to work with? Can they
Yeah.
meet deadlines? Can they, deadlines and turnaround times are huge. And
Yeah.
the publishing industry is much smaller than it seems, and word gets around about how people are like to work with. And so
Yeah.
you're completely right. You want kind of a good story behind you and a good track record of taking your stories from your mind to book form.
Yeah. And what was the turnaround time for, you publishing just one book, let's say? Because I think people like don't understand how it is a long process. Once you've got the book, you've got edits, you've got multiple drafts of the book, and then you've got all these deadlines, and then you have to wait until you've got your cover, you've got the proofs in the mail. I mean, it's a long-winded thing.
It's a very, very long-winded. It is such a process of, as you said, just kind of going from point A all the way to the end. And for me, 3 books in 3 years was a lot, because you're trying to market and publish and focus on the book that just came out, but then you're also already diving into and working on and creating the next book in the series. And so keeping track of things and keeping things, when you're talking about them, am I talking about something that's already been published? Am I talking about something I shouldn't have shared because I'm actually just working on that in the next book? You really do have very strict timelines and deadlines. And I try to always be very respectful of those as an author, because I know my editor and the people on my team also have deadlines that they're working for, and that they're trying to do. And just so you know, I'm not sure where we are in the process, but I do have another commitment coming up.
Yeah.
So I probably am going to need to wrap up in the next 5 minutes or so. I'm so sorry.
No, it's okay. We're done. I'll just ask you one more question and then
Perfect.
I've only got one question left. So what advice would you give aspiring authors looking to get published?
Right. You have to be comfortable sharing what you've created and receiving feedback on it, whether that is to friends, to beta readers, people in a critique group, taking workshops and getting professional feedback on things. But until you're at the point where you can hand off something that you've written to someone else, you're probably not ready for the publishing journey. Because it is one thing to hear feedback from a person that loves and supports you. It is quite another to hear feedback from someone that you've never met, who picked up your book and has thoughts on it and wants to share them with the entire world.
Yeah.
So really, really making sure that you're in a good place mentally where you can handle feedback, good or bad. Also, to read prolifically, because you really need to know what's going on in the genre that you're writing in at the time that you're trying to publish. The tropes change, pacing in books changes, whether we like one point of view or multiple point of views changes. And while I always think you should write the story that is in your heart to be told, especially if you're looking for hybrid publishing or traditional publishing, you also have to look at what is hot in the market right now, and what will sell and what will spark readers' interest. And, for me, when I'm deep in the middle of editing, it's hard for me to read other books because I'm so worried I'll accidentally steal something from them and put them in what I'm writing.
Yeah.
So I really try to build in times where, like, when my book goes to my editor to be worked on, that's when I can turn to my TBR pile and say, okay, now I can read and soak this stuff in and think about it. So write and read as much as you can, and surround yourself by people who love and support you, because this is a long process and you're going to need all the encouragement you can get.
Yeah. Oh, thank you for that advice. So where can our listeners and viewers find you?
So my website is my first and last name, katiekeridan.com. I am most active on Instagram at Katie Keridan. You can also find me on TikTok, Facebook, and very, very infrequently on X. It sounds weird saying that, but on, the site that used to be known as Twitter. And,
I still call it Twitter. I don't call it.
No, I just feel wrong saying that. But yeah, definitely Instagram is where I'm the most active.
So we're so thankful that you took the time out of your day to come here and talk to us, and we enjoyed learning from you and getting to know the brain behind the series. So thank you very much for coming.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been absolutely delightful, and I've loved this chance to talk all things books.